Hmm. All right. Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Shavis, Perek Zayin, starting Halacha Beis. We are learning Daf Nun Zayin. We left off on Daf Nun Zayin, Amud Aleph, 3 lines from the top by the Mishnah Halacha Beis. But before we begin today's Daf, I just want to explain, we didn't have enough time to put together the two Mishnayos, and the one in Shvius and the one in Sanhedrin, Shitas Rabbi Yehuda. So here in Shvius, Rabbi Yehuda is lenient by saying that even though there is the general prohibition of doing schoida with non-kosher foods, the Mishnah, the Chachamim, everyone allows that if you have a person whose parnasa is to trap animals, and his goal is to trap and to sell kosher animals, if in the net also together with the kosher comes non-kosher, he's allowed to sell it. Because he's not only doing business with non-kosher. Rabbi Yehuda adds to that. He says, even if there's not a professional trapper, a person is walking down the street and he chances upon a carcass, a nevela. He's also allowed to sell it. The only thing he's doing is selling non-kosher, but that's not a sole occupation. That's not a sole, he's not doing that for a business. Happened to be that okay. This is very similar to the Mishnah we learned yesterday in Sanhedrin. What did we learn in the Mishnah in Sanhedrin? That from the various categories of people that are not trustworthy, neither to be a dayan nor to be an aid, are people that do business with Peda Shviz. Comes along Rabbi Yehuda, and we're going according to the first Braisa's understanding Bishitas Rabbi Yehuda, and he holds that even if a person is only doing business on Shvius with Peda Shvius, as long as during the other 6 years he then is doing kosher business, he is trustworthy. Even though right now the only thing he's doing is something not kosher. This is mamish like Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah. In other words, the Chachamim in Sanhedrin who disagree with Rabbi Yehuda hold that in order for you to be allowed to be trustworthy, we tolerate also doing business with Peda Shvius. But not only, very much like in our Mishnah, if you are selling kosher food, kosher animals, you can also sell a carcass. Also, but not only. Rabbi Yehuda is allowing for a person who chances upon an avela to go and sell it. That means at that time, he's only selling something not kosher. Rabbi Yehuda allows it, it's similar to Rabbi Yehuda allowing someone who during Shvius is only doing something wrong. It's okay, because he has other occupations that he does at other times. That's why the comparison was mamish gavaldik. However, like we learned on top of the Amid, that Rabbi Yossi Barabun actually explains that the reason why we are lenient when it comes to a trapper, we don't tolerate doing business with non-kosher food, period. Why do we allow for a trapper to also sell non-kosher animals? Because the way the tax system worked then is that everything that fell into your trap was something that you have to pay taxes for. So for Chachamim now to make this Isur D'Rabbanan and tell you can't even sell it, that will be something that will become impossible for people to adhere to. Okay. Now, the topic of of today's daf, we're going really back to the beginning of this Perek, which is various items. And here with Kevan, we can have various pictures of those things that are imbued with Kedusha Shviz. What will that be, guys? I just want to, the Mishnah doesn't even say it. Michael Adam, something that is generally used for human food, something that's generally used for animal fodder, Michael Behema, Minei Tsoivim, or the third is something that's generally used for dyeing. Now, if you remember, we had a topic in the Gemara about something that's used for perfume. We're going to touch upon that in the Mishnah indirectly. Okay, because we also learned a few days ago about the rose. We're going to speak, the Mishnah will speak about the rose. But our Mishnah is going to give you examples of items that are subject to the sanctity of Shvius, but are not subject to beer. other items that not only are subject to the sanctity of Shvius, they are also subject to the dinam of biur. And as we learned in Halacha Aleph, if something is miskayim ba'aretz, that means it's always found for the wild animals in the fields, it will not be subject to biur. Only a product that at some time during the year, generally during winter, it's no longer found in the fields to the wild beasts, that will be subject to biur. After giving examples, the Mishnah is going to address now what were to happen if you have two items. They both have Kedusha Shvis. One is subject to biur. At that time, you have to be mafkirit, minimally. One is not subject to biur. What happens if they get mingled or mixed one with the other? And we will apply the rules of bitul, which is generally, right, min b'minoi, bin m'she'ein minoi, the echad b'shishim, that if it's not batul, then the restriction of the one that's subject to biur will be imposed on the other one, even though the other one in itself is not subject to biur, but now one is imbued in the other, one is mingled with the other. So we're going to have some review of dinam of taroivis. We're going to have an opportunity to again repeat Shitas Rabbi Yehuda, the Tana Rabbi Yehuda, that min b'mino is not batel. We're going to point out that in our sugya, we already learned about this a few daf ago, we don't have to follow Shitas Rabbi Yehuda, and still we will be machmer by min b'minoi, right? Because we're going to view biur as being a davar sheyesh le'matirin, as we'll speak out again, and we're going to review this. We learned this last week or 2 weeks ago, and finally a new gavaldik thing. At Khan, when we speak about biur, we're speaking about, is it found in the fields? Is it miskayim ba'aretz? Or is it not miskayim ba'aretz? Now, let me give you another possibility. And we're going to be learning about shoots that come off certain plants that are edible until a certain point. At some point, they don't get detached. They don't fall off and wither, but they become hard and inedible. Many plants are that way. In other words, when the shoot comes out, it's softish. We can see it, like even on our palm trees. And then at some point, it becomes hard. I see this in pine trees. So now what's the issue? You would say that if at some point it becomes hardened, then it's not available. Animals don't eat it anymore. That should be subject to shvius. Lav dafka. Lav dafka. Why lav dafka? Sometimes yes, sometimes not. Because if it remains attached to the tree itself, just like the tree is not subject to biur. Now I understand the tree is not subject to biur because the tree is not subject to kedusha shvius. Because the tree is not Michael Adam, the tree is not Michael Behema, the tree is not Mimine Hatsoivim, but still, since it's attached to the tree, you can make an argument, as we will at times, that it will never be subject to biur. Because since it's attached to its source, the source, let's say, is exempt from the biur status, so the shoot always remains exempt from the biur status. That's a new nuance. So if you were to cut these shoots off the tree and store them in your shed, l'maichel behema, just for example, again, you would argue, okay, the shoots in your shed remain soft. They are inside your house. The ones out there in the wild, now they became hardened. I don't care, because they are hardened while they're connected to the tree. So the whole product is not subject to biur. Okay, Chavre, let's go inside. Halacha Beis Daf Nun Zayin. Many of these items, again, if you want, you can look up today the pictures. If you're following our Zoom, let's see how quick Kaven will be. But we are beginning with shoots. They are called lulavim, very similar to the word lulav that we use from a date palm. Same idea. Many trees have shoots. Doesn't have to be on top of the tree, but they are edible. Some of them, we'll see, are edible when they are marinated, l'maichel adam. Some of them are edible, l'maichel behema. So lule ziradim, there's a tree called a service tree. This is the name of the tree, ziradim. Charuvim, we know, carob tree. Yesh lahem shviis. And why are they subject to shvius? Because they are edible for human beings when they're marinated. And we already spoke out before that it could be that when you take them off the tree, they don't even have kedusha shvius yet. because they're not yet marinated. And it doesn't bother me that when I took it off the tree, it wasn't subject to shvius. When you marinate them, now they are subject. And therefore, we already learned this topic in the beginning, villa de meim shvius, because of the rule that the kedusha of shvius goes to its exchange. Furthermore, yesh lehem biur, they are subject to biur because these shoots of zeradim and charuvim, they wither and fall off the tree in winter. And when they wither and fall off the tree, they're not available anymore. So therefore, it's subject to biur. And again, as we learned in the beginning with the general rules, since it is subject to biur, if you sold it ba'ofen hamuter, even ba'ofen ha'aser, but we're not speaking about dinim atal rishay askinan. So then uvla demayim is also subject to biur, whether it is to be mafkedet, whether it is to actually get rid of it, destroy it. Next category, and we're going to have a lot in the Gemara and Braisas about the second category. So the first category was Michael Adam, Zuradim and Charuvim. It's pashut geschmack to learn these mitziasin. Lule ha'ela. Now the word ela, tachas ha'ela, I think we have in the Chumash. In English, it's called a terubinth. Terubinth. This I looked up. It's a tree. But the shoots off that tree, very nice. Or the boitna is the shoots of a pistachio tree. Don't forget, guys, nuts. By us, we make ha'etz on nuts, other than on peanuts that you make ha'adama. That's why peanuts might be not peanuts we don't eat on Pesach because of kitnias, because it's a hadama. There's no kitnias in ha'etz, but all these things are trees. So the shoots off a pistachio tree. And the final one is ha'atodim, is a thorn bush. These shoots were not generally used l'maichel adam, but they are used l'maichel behema. Now, yesh lem shvius v'lo d'meim shvius, aber ein lehem biur v'lo d'meim biur. They're not subject to biur. That's the next big rule in the Mishnah. Why? Because these shoots do not wither. They don't fall off the tree. They endure on the tree. They stay on the tree. And again, we already spoke out in the intro, and we're going to learn about that at the end of today's daf. Even though they harden, so we're going to get back to that, but they're not subject to biur at all. And therefore, if you exchanged it for money or for anything else, the exchange item won't have that, it won't be included in the dinim of biur. However, when it comes to these three plants, the Elah, the Boitna, and the Ha'atodim, shoots is one category. Leaves is another category. Aval La'olin are subject to biur. They are also generally Meichel Behema. So it's a given that Lahem, Yesh Lahen Shvius, Ulademeim Shvius, they are also subject to biur. Why? Because they fall from their source, these leaves. Next category, Havera the rose, Hakoifer is henna, all right? The plant, I'm assuming that what the Sfardim paint on their hands comes from the koifer. Remember, I think it was in 2015, in the previous Gaza war, when Chabad Solo, we made a trip, and one of our members, not to mention his name, he never saw a Sfardik henna. He never saw that. And we went to Ashkelon. Remember, the first night we came from the airport to Ashkelon. There was a henna, and they were so happy that we came to visit Israel that we were all invited to the henna. I went to sleep, Baruch Hashem, because we woke up next morning to learn. I needed to sleep, and this guy, they put on his hand this brown, and he ate it, and he didn't know. He made a brach and he ate it. Anyways, I think this is the henna. Now, ktaf, we also learned about a few daf ago. So, ktaf is balsam. Okay. Now, we're going to speak that this is the fragrant resin, goo, that comes from a balsam tree. That's what we are referring to. That's the ktaf. Hanoitef ma'atze haktaf. We say every day in karbanis, for those people who say karbanis, as we all should. And loites. Loites is a certain type of pine. It's called the stone pine. Gavaldik, I love it. if I remember correctly, there are 10 types of pine trees, right? Really, eres. 10 types of eres trees. That's what I remember from the Gemara, and one of them is pine. Oh, so here, Yeshlem Shviz. Now here, this is a whole new category, a biggest chiddush now. I want you to know that they're not Michael Adam, they're not Michael Behema. I know I said that the henna is used to paint your hand. That's a Sfardish thing. It's not, you don't dye clothing with it. Why are they subject to Shviz? So it's either or. Either this will be a chiddush. I know we touched upon this last week, because they are fragrant. But that's if we're going to say that something that's fragrant and used for people, not on their bodies, but to smell it, is subject to shviz. But even if we're not going to go with that, they are used to flavor or to season food. So even though they're not used directly as food, but something that's used to season food is subject to shviz. So that's a new thing. And v'lo shviz. Now, what about biur? Why didn't the Mishnah mention biur? So we already had this. This is not the first time. And what the Rash Shadilio reminds us, and if you want to look, it's mamish in middle of the left column in the Rash Shadilio. Like, why didn't the Mishnah speak about biur? Every case is a case. And in every case, some of them are subject to biur and some of them are not. Like the Gemara said before, it's not across the board. And he gives examples that when it comes to the leaves, to the petals of the rose, yesh biur, that we do have biur. And he goes one by one. By sraf, in other words, he just reminds us what we had before in the Gemara, that whenever Rabbi doesn't speak about biur, it doesn't mean because they're not subject to biur. It doesn't mean that they are subject to biur. It means that in every one of these items, the vered, the koifer, the ktof, and the loitas, these four, it depends where you planted them. Some of them, different species, they will wither. Some of them will not wither. And therefore, since it's a case by case, we already know the klal. Rebbe didn't want to make a statement that's not going to be accurate. It's going to be accurate only sometimes. Now, when it comes to the ktof, Rab Shimon Oimer, he argues with the ktof. Ein l'ktov shviz. Why? Mipnei she'einoi pedi. And that's a very big thing over here. Now, according to Rab Shimon, says the Marafulda in middle of the Amid, mipnei she'einoi pedi v'dinam ke'etzim. All right? Which would mean, just to make it clear, if the reason why the Tanakama says that balsam, yesh shviz, is because he holds that something that is made for its fragrance, not perfume to put on you, but to smell it. Tanakama holds it's subject to shviz. That will be the machlokes. And Rab Shimon holds no. If you eat it, human being, even animal, subject to shviz, used for dyeing begodim for people, kalim for people. But if it's only to smell, that would be the machlokes. Or
what would the Tanakama assume that it's going to be forbidden? What would be its foundation?
In other words, is either a machlokes tanoim, whether if an item is primarily used for its fragrance, does it become subject to shviz or not? What makes something subject to shviz? Michael Adam, Michael Behema Minei Tzoivim. Fragrance is le Adam, but it's not on the Adam. Michael. We also learned, Yakir, last week, that something that's used for perfume, that's put on the person, is subject to shviz. But there's a difference between something that you're going to eventually put on you. That's the picture from the trip. Very good. Or if it's something that you're going to smell, like we spoke about the cloves, not something that you put on you. Okay, no, that's not that was the vineyard trip. I take that back. My beard was not as white then by that trip to Gaza. We slept a few feet away from Gaza then. I think it was 2015. Anyways, so now another thing. If we're going to understand the Tanakama's chiddush regarding the Veda, the Koifer, Ktof, and the Loitas, is why are they subject to shvi'is? Because they season food. Which they do. Rab Shimon is not arguing by all of the four. He's only arguing by the Ktof. Now, I want to tell you, the ktaf has a fragrance, the other ones don't. So if it's about psamim, I understand the machloikis, clear. If it's about seasoning food, it's something interesting. That means that Rab Shimon agrees that if something is a proper food seasoner, then it's included in shvius, because Michael Adam, Yakir. Michael Adam doesn't mean you have to eat it, but you put it in the food. Black pepper for me. I don't eat pepper, black, but you put it in the food. It's a spice. Shvius, daf nun zayin. But tough. It's interesting. It will be a machloikis between Tanoim whether the level of the usage of the ketaf qualifies it as a flavoring, as a seasoning of food. Maybe Rab Shimon holds that it's not used that much to flavor food. Either the machloikis is whether something for fragrance is included in shvius or not across the board, and the only thing from the four that's mamish fragrance is ktaf. Ktaf is a oil. I know that. Balsam. You can order it right now. Or it's about food seasoning and it's about the ktaf individually. Okay. And now the Mishnah is going to speak about the dinim of mingling and of bittul. So when the Mishnah says veret chodosh, and now guys, we're going to come back to this not tomorrow, but in two daf nun tes. We're going to come back to this a lot. But in the meanwhile, let me just say how we're going to learn right now. Chodosh means the 7th year. It's new meaning, you picked it on the 7th year. Yashan means 6th year. Now that the Mishnah established, and no one argues on the vered, that vered yesh shvius, let me go further. Not only vered yesh shvius, but like we also learned last week in the Braisa, some of the vered for sure is subject to beer. So if I have a vered, I have the rose petals, and I soak it b'shemen yashan, which was common practice. One of the ways you make perfume is you take one of these plants, you soak them in oil, the fragrance goes into the oil, even though we're going to touch upon this right now, and we're going to come back to this on Daf Nun Tes. We're going to be learning about perfume making. So there is a noise and tam going on over here. So here you have the new veret, subject to beer. You're taking oil of the 6th year. The oil is not shvius. The oil is not subject to shvius. And now the question is, what's going to be the status of the oil? Now there is a rule, we learned all this, that kavush kimavushal, we're going to go with the Rishonim that hold that it has nothing to do with spice. Cold water, here it's cold oil. Kavush would mean that if it's soaked for 24 hours or more, the flavor of one is imparted in the other. L'chu'ura, in our case, if you put the rose petals in oil and you keep it there for 24 hours or more, so then the fragrance of the rose was imbued into the oil. So therefore you would think that the oil should be subject now to beer, right? So the Mishnah says no. The rose petal is always subject to beer. So you take it out. When the time of biur comes, yelaket es haveret, says the Mishnah, aber the oil will remain permitted. Oy gewalt. And that has
even though it has the flavor of
that's
the rose
the problem.
petals.
Very good. That's the problem. And the Gemara will clarify the Mishnah. Clear, okay, but in other words, when you learn the Mishnah, you are bewildered. We should be. Look inside the Rash Shirilio left column, around 8 lines from the bottom. Malaket haveret, he explains, b'shvius, and we're speaking about because the vered, chodosh means it's subject to shvius. It grew, it was picked on shvius. V'hashemen ein shvius. Now hold on. Let's go in the opposite direction. Keep your finger in the Rash Shirilio, and let's go back in the Mishnah. What happens if the yashan b'chodosh? Same thing. So a yashan would mean that you have a rose of the 6th year. That's the way we begin learning now. And chodosh means that the oil is oil of shvius. We already learned that oil is subject to beer. We already learned that. Subject to shvius on the 8th year at some point. Okay? Here, chayav b'biur. Chayav b'biur. It says, what's chayav b'biur? Look inside the Rash Shirilio. 6 lines from the bottom on the left, hakoil, everything is chayev b'beer, both the vered and the shemen, both the vered and the shemen. appreciate what the Mishnah is saying the way we're learning it at first glance. We're saying that even though the rose does not impart flavor into the oil, nevertheless, the oil imparts oil flavor into the rose. I mean, that's what the Mishnah is saying. So not only is the oil subject in the Chadash, but the rose is also subject.
The rose does impart flavor into
I
the
know
oil.
that, Kevan. So I'm telling you that the Gemara on Daf Nun Tes will ask that question. I don't want to go into that Daf
Got
right
it.
now.
Got
This
it.
is a part. I mean, when the Gemara refers back to the Mishnah, remember this will be a problem. We got a problem here because exactly I was saying the way you make perfume, that's the way everyone makes perfume. When the Torah speaks about the Shemen HaMishcha, that's what the Torah we learned Chumash Rashi. Before we learned this in the Gemara. You take different items, you soak them. They would soak them in oil. Remember that, and then they would remove. Then you remove it from the oil. But the oil is a shemen that has a fragrance. How did it get fragrance? From the item that was put in it. Very good. So that's a problem, Keva. Now, next case in the Mishnah. Charuvim Chadashim. We're going to go with the same logic. Chadashim means the 7th year. The Mishnah said Charuvim is carobs. Carobs is Michael Adam. Charuvim Chadashim. The shekivasham that they were soaked means for 24 hours or more. Just to know. Be yayin. And here the yayin is yayin yashan. So here, or in the opposite direction, not the rose and the oil, carobs and wine. I'm thinking, what a pity, you're ruining the wine. Mistama, there's something good in the carobs that, or v'yishanim v'chadashim, old carobs of the 6th year, of the 5th year. Bechadash means in Shvi'is wine. Here they are both subject to biur. Because here, when it comes to carobs and wine, whichever one is of the 7th year, that imparts its flavor in the 6th year product, whichever direction. And what the Mishnah is telling you is that nois and tam will make the item that absorbed the tam subject to all of the restrictions. It's subject to the dinim of biur, even though one was not subject to anything because it was of the 6th year. Wine is subject to shvius, but it's of the 6th year. And Zajac. And now the Mishnah gives you the rule. And what's the rule? Because you can't say that it imparts flavor no matter when. No, there is a ratio. Koil shehu b'nois and tam. And we know that the general nois and tam chevre, everyone here learns smichas, 60-1, 60-1, or let me say differently, 59-1. Because if it's 60-1, then there is no tam. But up until 60-1, then chayiv levayer. Now leave the case, Kavan, of the rose and the oil out. But let's use just the case of the charuv and the wine. Gabaldik, because we're saying that no matter which direction. But when do we say that? Only min b'sheina minoi. Then that's for you. Aber min b'minoi. But if it's min b'minoi, then the rule is kol shu, which means it's never going to be nullified. That means I'm just teaching the Mishnah that if one drop of shvius wine, what's an example? One drop of shvius wine falls into a barrel that has a million gallons of 6-year wine, everything is subject to beer. You got to make a big fabrengen because you got to finish it before beer. Now, guys, I want to review something. Tanoim, Rabbi Yehuda holds that all of this we learned from Dam Hapar B'Dam Hasoir. Remember that? And the fact that at some point there's a machlokes in Yuma. When would they mix the two bloods of Yom Kippur together? At some point whether they mixed it together only when they poured it on the Mizbeach, Apnim, at what point? At the 4 corners, on the top. But whenever it is, they mixed it together, the Torah still identifies them, the mixture, as Damapar and Damasoir, even though it should have been nullified because of the quantities of Damasoir is insignificant in the get Damapar. And from there, Rabbi Yehuda holds that Dam B'Dam is not bottle. From there, the Tana Rabbi Yehuda holds Min B'Mino is never bottle. We don't paskin like Rabbi Yehuda in Shulchan Aruch. We don't paskin like that. Now, when Rabbeinu HaKadosh is writing in our Mishnah, min b'minoi kolshu, it's not because he's passing like Rabbi Yehuda. I'm just reviewing something we learned recently and the last 2 weeks. What do we say? We say that davar sheyesh loy matirin midrabanan is never batal. And we learned that something that's subject to beer is called a davar sheyesh loy matirin. And I'll tell you 2 ways of explaining why it's a davar sheyesh loy matirin. Yeah, because the prohibition of beer is, number one, eat it before it's subject to beer. Why do you have to wait until the time of beer comes? And then you got a problem, eat it before. And furthermore, if we're going to put aside Shitas HaRambam, if we're going to go with the other Rishonim, even by the time of beer, it doesn't mean you can't eat it. Only beer means, according to most Rishonim, take it out of your house, declare it hefker, and after you declare it hefker, you can take it back. So you can eat it. So why would we say that, let's be mevatel it? Don't be mevatel it. It's not that if you won't be mevatel it, it's going to remain asr. Okay, so it's subject to beer. Either or. Whichever way you're going to learn, I just want to make it very clear. When Rabbi says here, min b'minoi kolshu, even not Rabbi Yehuda, which means even halachically, when it comes to shvi'is, min b'minoi is never going to be batal, because davar sheyesh lematirin is not batal. Problem is, if davar sheyesh is not batal, so what about min b'she'ena minoi? Anyways, we spoke about this 2 weeks ago, but that's what the Rabbi is saying over here. One way of just wording that answer, is because the Rabbi Yehuda is saying something. How does bittul work, guys? How does bittul work? When you have two things that are clashing, so one dominates the other, whether it's a skafya, whether it's a sapcha, but that's only because there was a clash. If they're not clashing, why should one be mevatel the other? Min b'minoi is not clashing. There's no clash. They're the same. And even though we don't paskin like Rabbi Yehuda, but when you take the min b'minoi compounded with the fact that it's a davar sheyesh lematirin, and it's a stretch by beer, it's not your classic davar sheyesh lematirin. It's going to be subject to beer, but nishkafelach, when you put them together, that's why we say our Mishnah that even though we don't paskin like Rabbi Yehuda, min b'minoi b'kolshu, but min b'she'ena minoi, we don't say, beer is davar sheyesh lematirin, davar sheyesh lematirin, it should never be bottled. We don't say that, because it's subject to beer. And min b'she'ena minoi, it's like and not like. So there's a clash. When there's a clash, one will have to, it's really al pi chasidus, it's a skafya and a sapcha. The proof of a skafya, chayzer v'neyar, I'm just speaking quickly for the people who remember what these rules are, is a raya that even when it was bottled, it was only b'oifen shel skafya. That's why it can be chayzer v'neyar. When you don't say chayzer v'neyar, that's because after his skafya came the avodas tzadikim, or the gift to tzadikim, it became a sapcha, right? A sapcha would be chaticha nasan avela. I'm saying this l'chesroinim. That's called a sapcha. It doesn't exist anymore. If it doesn't exist anymore, there's nothing to be reawakened. By most of us, the Yetzer Hara is chayzer v'neyar. That's what Alter Rebbe writes. Okay. This was beautiful. Now, Chaver Daf Nun Zayin Omid Beis, it's geschmack to learn this. The Oisva hadn't made small dafim, so we can go normal. We don't have to run. Now, Shvi, so he said, "Es kol shu b'mina." Again, the Mishnah apparently it looks like is reiterating, like we explained that Shvi, so he said, "Es kol shu b'mina." Why is Rebbe repeating it? We just said that. That's what the Rashidilio says over here to point out that he's not paskening like Rabbi Yehuda. According to Rabbi Yehuda, Oiseres kolshu b'mina is not neged to shvius. It's anything that has restrictions. Is oiser b'kolshu. Shvius is oiser kolshu b'mina. Look inside the Rashidili on the second mamish in the top of the right. Lav mishum desfira like Rabbi Yehuda. To Amar Hasam and Chulin min b'mina kolshu v'chulei. But like we learned above, and Daf Mem Tesam at base, like he's quoting, that only b'negea biur, only for beer do we say that it's b'mina because it's davar sheyesh lematin. Shloi b'mina v'noisen tam. Okay, let's start with the Gemara. So I want to go back. The Mishnah gave a category of Michael Adam. The Michael Adam, we also mentioned, is only Michael, the Adam, after it's marinated. And we learned again before, it doesn't bother me that when I cut that shoot off the tree, at that moment, it's not subject to anything. But when you marinate it, now it's subject to beer. Now it's subject to shviz. The next category in the Mishnah was examples of Michael Behema, which were Lulave Ha'ela, Boitna, and Atadim. And there the Mishnah said that subject to Shviz, therefore Ulidemeim Shviz, and not only that, but the shoots are not subject to Biur. The shoots, let me say in the positive, they are accorded with biur exempt status, not subject to biur. Why would that be? Because it doesn't wither. It doesn't fall off the tree. There's a problem. Problem is, it doesn't fall off the tree. It stays on the tree. But you know what happens in winter? It becomes so hard that it becomes inedible. So why are we saying that it's not subject to biur? I know it doesn't wither off the tree like the leaves, but it's not edible. It's not available. L'chaya basada. It's not available. They can't eat it during the winter because it becomes hard. The answer must be is that since it's connected to the tree is not subject to any dinim, not to shvius, not to biur. So since it's connected to the tree, the biur exempt status of the tree automatically goes into the shoots. This is a chiddush. This we never learned before. Now we're going to see if this will be consistent with other dinim that we learned above. So says the Gemara, this is a question that Berashe de Pirka means in the opening of the Pedek. What are we talking about? Look inside the Maraful, the 4 lines from the top. Then, Ale Luf, remember the leaves of the Luf. If you remember, the Luf itself, we're speaking about wild Luf onion, the bulb that remains in the ground, endures during winter. The luf itself is, the ikar haluf is available l'chaya, and therefore it's not subject to beer. But remember, the leaves of the luf, they are subject to beer. Problem is, again, the mitzias, the Marafuld is saying that the leaves of luf, they do not fall off the luf. They don't fall off the luf. Abervas, they're not edible. They're not edible. Very good. That's a good picture. During winter. But now I got a problem. Who cares if they're not edible? We're using a logic that if something is mechuber to its source, if the source is not subject to beer, that which is connected to the source is also not subject to beer. So why would we not say that by the alei aluf? Why would we not say by the alei aluf the same that we are saying by the lulav of the elan, the boitna, and the atadim? Let's read it inside. Frekti Gemara, Berasha the Pirka, in the beginning of the Pedic, referring to the alei aluf. At Omar, we said that ein oichlin al ha'ikar, that you're not allowed to eat them. They are subject to beer, even though they are connected to their ikar. And over here, at Omar, but over here, you're saying that the lulav of the elah is not subject to beer. The animals can't eat it when it gets hard. I don't care because it's connected to the tree. So here we are using the fact that you can eat it because of its ikar. Why are you not consistent? Gavaldik. Amar Rav Pinchas answered the Gemara. Here, I'll tell you the difference. Taman over there, referring to the beginning of the Pedic, referring to the leaf of the luf onion. For those who saw the picture here on Zoom, ein soifan lahakshois, which means they don't harden. It's interesting. Since they don't harden, they're not edible. They're not edible in winter. They're connected, but they're not hard. Since they're not hard, the bulb of an onion is hard. The leaf is soft. So since there is a physical characteristic that separates it from its source, that characteristic never changes. Ein soifam lahakshos. So we always accord them two different, we always view them as two distinct things. The bulb, the ikar, and the leaf. And we can't therefore say, since it's connected to the root and the root is not subject to beer, the leaf should never be subject to beer. They're distinct. Even though they're physically connected, they're hard and they're soft. But Baram, Hach, over here, the lulav of the Elah changes. When it grows out, it's soft. And animals eat it. When it's on the tree, if you cut it off the tree, it stays soft. But at some point in winter, at the end, soifan lahakshos, they become hard. When they become hard, they are more similar to its source. Mekiven shehikshu nasa ka'avihen. I know Av means a father here. Av means the source. Now this is really amazing. What's really amazing? How many times did we quote that concept that if you're mechuber, you're good. If you're connected, you're good, right? Now we're learning a new nuance. That even when you're connected, there's two categories. You can be connected, but you can be dislike, not like. So let's say that hard is emunah. Just to know that always hard is emunah, because emunah is not negotiable. Seichel is not hard because you have a logic like this, you have a logic like that. Emotions are all over the place. Bipolar, goes up, it goes down. What is hard? Once pure faith, the simple faith, right? Eson, the Esonim, right? The Avos. Why are they called Eson? Why are they called mighty? Because Eson means hard, like a rock, right? Eitan. And Eson has to do with the fact that they were the root of the emun of the Jewish people. So not only do you have to be connected, let's use the word connection of doing what they say you should do. Like mekusher. How are you mekusher to the Rebbe? You do what the Rebbe is telling you to do. So normally you say you're good, it's good. You're mekusher, you're connected. Here it's not enough to be connected. If you remain, if they're hard, which they are, and we're soft, not enough. For you to be connected to their status, you have to be connected and you have to be like them. You have to be hard. And even if you're not hard now, soifan lahakshos is good enough. If you are on a path that you know that you're getting stark, not because of you, because God is going to give it to you because you're making yourself worthy to it, then you're connected. It's very deep concepts. Hard, soft. Okay. Now, let's open up a braisa. We have 2 more minutes, and then we're going to continue with this braisa tomorrow. And again, we're continuing to learn the din of the lulave ha'ela and boitna and ha'atadim. Now, there is a 4th item that our Mishnah does not mention, but for that you have to look inside the Rashirilio. The Rashirilio, 10 lines from the bottom, he doesn't. It's amazing how the Yerushalmi didn't even quote it. How is it go? They're speaking to people with very big expectations. So the Tanei that the Gemara is beginning is a Tosefta. And over there, they added, look inside them, the Rashirilio. Now, 9 lines from the bottom. There is an Adol. Adol, with an ayin, is some sort of vegetable plant, which, by the way, makes it different than the Elah, which is in the category of a tree. Boitna is a tree. Atadim are trees. And he adds the Adol plant. The adol plant resembles a radish. It's not a radish, it resembles a radish. It puts it in the same category. That it's called Michael Behema. So therefore, it's subject to Shvis. If you exchanged it, Shvis, but it's not subject to beer. By the adol, I'll tell you, because it remains in the ground. Many wild vegetables that remain in the ground are always available. They don't get ruined in the winter. Now, the Kulan, so first of all, the Braisa, number 1, the Braisa, when it speaks about the Elah, Boitna, and Atadim, it doesn't give you 3 examples, it gives you a 4th example. All right. And now there's more details to the Braisa. There's a Rab Shimon that we're going to quote tomorrow. But I want to just read inside the Gemara today. Let's get to the bottom. The Kulan says the Braisa, and they're speaking about, the Braisa is speaking about the shoot and the leaves. We'll get to that. All of them, not only all the 4, their shoots and their leaves, how do you classify what year they belong to? We already learned this before. And we differentiate between a tree and between a vegetable. The Adol, our Mishnah B'chlal doesn't mention because it's the vegetable. How do you place the year of anything connected to a tree? not only the Rosh Hashanah is different, which this price is not even talking about, Tu B'Shvat, by the vegetable is Echad B'Tishrei, but what stage of development needs to be for it to be classified a product of that year? So by the tree, it has to do with when did it bud? When did the chanata happen? By the vegetable, it has to do when it was picked. So therefore he writes, V'kulon shenichnesu mishishis l'shvi'is. Right? That means that they sprouted on the 6th year, but no one harvested them. They went into the 7th year. All of them will be in the category of the 6th year. Why is that? Why is that all of them means the 3 of our Mishnah? Because by trees, we don't care when it was readied. We only care when the chanata happened. And if the chanata happened in the 6th year, you know what the 6th year means, my friends? Anytime before Tu B'Shvat of the 7th year, it's always going to be classified as a 6th year product. So it's b'chlal not subject to Shvi'is. Chutz min ha'adol, here the Gemara is already quoting the Bryce is quoting the adol. Since the adol, like we said, it's a certain vegetable that resembles a radish. It's in the category of vegetables. By vegetables, even if it primarily grew in the 6th year, but if it was picked on the 7th year means after Echad B'Tishrei, it will be classified as a 7th year product. Why? So at least we opened up the Bryce, and God willing,